A very warm welcome, everybody, to all of you joining us today, and we're absolutely delighted to be celebrating LGBT History Month with you, and also bringing you the launch of our new research, A New Frontier. So in an ideal world, well, of course, would be all together in some fantastic location, in London. But unfortunately, obviously, we're doing this sort of virtually. So it's been really great to see the amount of people register for today. We've had over 400 people register, which is absolutely terrific. And we're going to be bringing you a real mixture of different sort of dynamics during this session today. So we are going to be hearing some brilliant speakers. So we've got Hepsi Pemberton, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Equality Group. We've got Katerina Lloyd from Investment Week. We've got Marie Nanis from Northern Trust. Ian Rayner from SJP, and of course my esteemed colleague Jack Williams as well. Now we're really excited about today because really this project has been around about sort of 8 or 9 months in the making, with well over 300 people that have been involved, both in the data collection, analysis of the data, the report making, and all of the other things that go around sort of the edges to sort of get today sort of moving. So thank you to everybody that has contributed to this. It's been an absolutely brilliant process. And I do want to say a special thank you before we kick off today to Hepsi and her team at Equality Group, to Bisi and his team at the Bisi Alimi Foundation, and of course Paul Thompson and Anders Jacobson as well from LGBT Capital, who have been working on this research with us. And a real big spotlight and thank you to our sponsors, St James's Place Wealth Management and Northern Trust Asset Management. So today we're going to try and bring you as much sort of positivity as we can. We're going to look a little bit around sort of facts of History Month, look at some of the challenges that we still face today. And we're then going to get into a really interesting conversation with Hepsi and of course our speaker panel as well. So please do share the points that resonate with you on social media. You will notice that we've got the chat function on here, so please do share your thoughts, any questions that you've got as well. You can filter through this function or the Q&A section as well. But we would like to start off actually getting you all to do a little bit of thinking with us. So if you're expecting the webinar where you can dial in and just listen, really sorry, we are going to be asking you to sort of talk to us and give your views as well. But we'd like to sort of launch our first poll for today. So if I could ask Nahid, if you could kind of launch that for us. And the question is, when was LGBT History Month first founded? Write to us and share your thoughts. I'll give you a few seconds just to cast your votes there. And I can see there's an absolute surge of responses coming through. So we've got a very highly engaged group today. So do keep sharing your thoughts with us. And let's see what you all think. Give you a few more sort of seconds. Of course, LGBT History Month is very much a global movement and celebrated at different times around the world, depending on where we are. So we know here in the UK it's February, we know in the US October, November time, and we know in different parts of the world it's also different as well. So a few more sort of coming through there. So Nahid, if I could ask you to close the poll, let's see what people have said. Super. So we've got 26% saying 1994. We've got 21% of you saying 2000. 28% saying 2005, and 25% of you saying 2012. So I can tell you that the correct answer is actually 1994. So been going on a little bit longer than we think. If we could close the poll, that'd be great, Nikki. Thank you very much. Brilliant. Okay. So just to quickly touch on what you can expect in terms of structure for today's session, the lineup that we've got for you over the next sort of 50 to 55 minutes, you can see here on the screen. But one thing we really would like to have is to hear your thoughts. We want to hear about what really resonates with you. So please do share your comments there in the chat function. In terms of LGBT Great, I know we've got a number of people that have logged in today that potentially haven't joined our community before. So, a very warm welcome to you. And LGBT Great, we work broadly across really the entire ecosystem within the investment, wealth management and savings industry. We do a lot of work around data and education. Awareness building is a key theme, a key way actually in which we can develop the LGBT agenda. And then really sort of intensifying our work across the industry to really bring role models to life and make all of these fantastic people within our industry, LGBT plus and our allies, clear and visible. And we know that this is important for a whole host of different reasons. We know it's critically important to our wonderful community in terms of the constant organisational signalling and support. We know that over 82% of all young people now are looking for visual demonstration when it comes to making conscious employment decisions. And so we need to see the LGBT and the equality really sort of shining through. And we're going to get into some of these details shortly. You can see some of the firms that we work with here. So we do represent now 30 global organisations across the world, and we've delivered a lot of our programmes in sort of different places, which have been really interesting. And we're going to sort of talk to you a little bit about now, a little bit about the history of LGBT History Month. And Jack, you're going to be joining me for this sort of discussions 10-minute section here. But let's get into some of these points sort of here, Jack. So tell us a little bit about which of these sort of dates really sort of resonate with you.
Sure, thank you. So you can see here kind of a timeline of modern LGBT plus equality. I suppose one that I really want to draw attention to that some of you might have heard of is the Stonewall Movement back in 1969. This was a time when LGBT plus people were really quite challenged and finding it quite difficult to express who they were openly. People were expected to wear certain clothing that matched their perceived gender. It was a really difficult time, and the Stonewall Movement was really the LGBT plus community coming together and standing up and saying, we're not going to be treated like this anymore. And it of course culminated in the very first, what we now know as the first modern Pride Parade. A few other kind of events that have happened. We're going to talk a little bit about Section 28 in the UK, which was a piece of legislation that affected how LGBT plus identities were able to be discussed in schools. And some of you might have heard of Matthew Shepard, who was a young gay man in the US who was unfortunately murdered in a hate crime incident. But from that, legislation was put in place to protect LGBT plus people. And I think what really speaks to me about a lot of these events, particularly on the kind of first half of the timeline, is that it's really about examples of LGBT plus people coming together in the face of adversity and oppression, coming together to kind of stand up for each other, support each other, and also be supported by allies, which, something we're really keen to talk about at LGBT Great is the importance of allyship and how we can all come together and support each other and kind of break down some of those barriers that people are facing.
Yeah, I think really interesting point actually, Jack, that you make about Stonewall. And I think, by a lot of sort of LGBT activists, the Stonewall movement was really sort of considered as the catalyst, if you like, for the birth of the LGBT sort of equality movement. If I just quickly sort of take you back to that time, some sort of 51 years ago, it was a time when, the LGBT community faced really sort of significant, oppression and social exclusion. It was a time when, the LGBT community were proactively targeted and used by members of the mafia as well, that were based in New York. And actually, what sort of came to a head was all of these different sort of pressures, and actually the LGBT community. And there was a really a great sort of session that I went to actually at the New York Library a couple of years ago that told the story of Stonewall. And actually what was really inspiring to see was the sort of the role that allies played at the time in really supporting sort of the community. So really sort of interesting to see there. Now, of course, we have sort of seen monumental progress, with LGBT rights globally since this time. And so obviously some of the milestones we can sort of see on here. And talk to us a little bit about, let's talk about the sort of UK for a second, though, Jack. And Section 28 was a real, a real problem and a real sort of, disrespect to sort of the LGBT community at the time. But tell us a little bit more about what that was.
Sure. So Section 28 basically meant that teachers could not be perceived to be promoting LGBT plus identities to young people in schools. But of course, what this actually meant in practice was that it was really difficult for teachers even to talk neutrally about LGBT plus identities, even just to share information about what they were, what gay meant, what bisexual meant, and so on. And actually it meant that it was really difficult for young LGBT plus people to even find any information about who they were, about their identities. It caused really a lot of damage. An example actually that I remember, I think back when I was at school, we had one teacher who was a gay man, and prior to the repeal of Section 28 in 2003, I remember he basically had a reputation for being a really mean teacher. And everyone was quite afraid of him. But actually what that was that he wasn't able to express who he was. He couldn't be out at work. He couldn't share that part of himself. I remember after 2003, when Section 28 was repealed, all of a sudden, he had that freedom and that ability to express himself, and actually suddenly became a whole different person. And it really just shows the impact of being able to be visible, being able to express yourself.
Yes.
And really the potential damage it can be caused to someone to have to hide part of themselves.
Yeah, there's a number of points that you mentioned there. I think that the point around not hearing anything about sort of same-sex relationships or gender identity in school actually really resonates with me. So I actually finished school in 2003, the same year that Section 28 was repealed. And actually, at the age of sort of 16, I really didn't have any sort of visibility. I'd never intentionally met another sort of LGBT person, apart from one friend in my year who I knew was also like me. But I think the impact of this, and I really do think back now, I never really realised at the time, but certainly from that age of sort of, I don't know, 14, 15, 16, through to really when I got to university, and probably a year after I got to university, I was really sort of quite frightened about really being myself. I didn't know other gay couples. I certainly didn't, have any sort of transgender or non-binary friends, or even know to some extent that they even existed. And actually that feeling of sort of isolation and loneliness, had a really sort of significant impact. And I think it really highlights this. I think it highlights the importance of education and the importance of awareness building. And this is one of the reasons why LGBT History Month is, so important. We've got to think about the progress that we've made and the lessons that we've learned, so we can apply these, positive learnings in taking sort of things forward. Now, we know from a sort of a legislation perspective, 2010 Equality Act was brought in, and generally sort of speaking, really from the period of sort of 2003 onwards, here in the UK, we constantly talk about the period of sort of LGBT enlightenment, where we started to see, legal provisions to protect members of the LGBT community. We have yet to see, I think, significant support from the current sort of UK government, and there's been a few things in which they've kind of ducked out of and not really stood up to what we've been looking for. But I do think that progress and the appetite for that progress is there. And I think one of the most exciting things when we look at US, we look at what's coming out of the sort of the Biden administration at the moment. We are starting to see very, very quickly, very clear, bold messaging regularly in support of the LGBT community. So President Biden has actually said that unless countries legislate to protect LGBT people, the US will enforce sanctions, meaning financial sanctions. So it's really interesting to see the allyship and the advocacy that's coming through in the new administration. And I really predict over the next 3 to 5 years that we will see a lot of progress further moving along. And Jack, let's quickly sort of do the second poll. And we wanted to ask you the following question. So Naheed, I've asked you to launch the poll for me. And the question, which country was the first to legalise same-sex marriage? Let's see what your thoughts are.
There we go.
Great. We've got lots of people voting. Wonderful. Keep your responses coming through. We've got a very engaged sort of group today, Jack, so thank you everyone. It's good to see the numbers going up, and thank you for your comments. Just while we're sort of waiting for you to cast your votes, please do, again, I can see some great comments coming through the chat function, and some good questions in the Q&A as well. Please do keep those coming through. Great, if we could close the poll, that'd be fantastic, thank you. And let's see what the results are telling us. So 54% saying the Netherlands, followed by 24% for Sweden. We've then got 16% for Canada and 6% for Spain. So it looks like, Jack, 54% of participants today are right. The answer is the Netherlands. So well done, everyone, sort of for that. So if we could close that, that'd be brilliant. Thank you.
It was, I believe, 2001 that the Netherlands legalised same-sex marriage, and since then we've seen, here in the UK and the US and many other countries. Now, I think now over 30 countries have legalised same-sex marriage, and we're seeing a lot of progress on that agenda. Yeah, absolutely. I think what always surprises me though, Jack, is that we didn't actually get same-sex marriage legalised here in the UK until much later than that. Canada was 2005. I think the UK was 2014, if I'm correct. I think so. Yeah, the US 2015. So we took quite a long time to catch up, actually, which was interesting. But that's probably a conversation
for another day. So whilst we have sort of talked about progress and we've considered some of the, some of the milestones there, there of course is still so many places, around the world where, same-sex activity is illegal, and there's still a lot more to do. So there's still very much, battles to be sort of fought and faced, and still a lot of history to make. And actually, there's a lot of countries, and the next sort of heat map will show you that there are a lot of countries that are actively legislating against sort of the LGBT equality. So I think it's really interesting, about what we still have to, to take on and really sort of, improve those environments and sort of situations and equality for LGBT people. Jack, let's sort of quickly just touch on the trans and non-binary agenda, because of course we've seen a real intensification around conversation and emphasis on this really in the last sort of, I'd say 1 to 2 years in particular. But talk to us very, very briefly about where we're up to at the moment.
Yeah, I think there's been a real push in public consciousness around transgender and non-binary identities. And what we're seeing is a lot of tension between some feminist organisations and trans and non-binary identities. An example that many people might have heard of is J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter books, and certain comments that she's made around transgender women. But I think where a lot of this stems from is a real barrier in terms of education and awareness, because just like when Section 28 was in place and there wasn't a lot of information available about gay identities, right now there are still areas where there isn't a lot of information available about transgender and non-binary identities. And I think people come across new concepts and can sometimes struggle to quite understand exactly what they mean. Fortunately, from that, we are seeing examples where less inclusive things are happening. So I think really the challenge there is about ensuring that people have access to all the information that they need and are able to start to have conversations about these concepts that might be new to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are still seeing, particularly in the investment, wealth management and the savings industry, we are starting to see a lot more questions being asked now around trans and non-binary issues and identities. And I know we talk a lot about this, Jack, on some of the training that we do, but I think a key point is that what we really see in the industry is a real lack of consciousness, lack of knowledge around the gender identity spectrum. And this is something that we really want to sort of advocate quite strongly for, and it's certainly a priority for us, because of course, the LGBT plus community, yes, it's about sexual orientation, but equally gender identity as well. There's a couple of really interesting points coming through here. So thank you very much, Brian, for sharing a point there. So the UK was the forefront of same-sex immigration for the Blair years. Brian, you've mentioned here that you were part of the Stonewall immigration group, so thank you very much for sharing that. And one of the first 50 people granted indefinite leave based on your same-sex relationship. So yeah, really interesting. Thank you for sharing. You've added here, I would say, although marriage took longer, the UK were trailblazers with gay rights. So absolutely, and thank you for sharing those points. Katrina from Investment Week has talked around how does the investment industry compare with other industry sectors. We know that from our data and our research is that we've got catching up to do, with other industry sectors. But I think the point I'll make is this: is that if we look at how the LGBT rate programme has really intensified sort of the LGBT agenda within the industry, and the number of firms and executive sponsors that are getting behind this and really pushing it, I think we've actually made, on a percentage basis, a lot more progress in a lot less time. So I'm really excited to see what moves on. So how we move on from here. I guess in terms of the agenda, visibility, of course, is absolutely key. And if I could ask you to move the next slide on for me, Jack. But visibility and working together is kind of the only way. And I've been having some really interesting conversations recently with various different people. And two of the legends that have got behind our work, particularly on the New Frontier report, Elton John and sort of David Furnish. But I do believe with them that the only way to really achieve progress is to remain visible, to remain consistent, and to really sort of work together. So thank you very much for endorsing our work. I'm not sure whether you're on the line today, but I'm sure you'll see the press release things going out as well. So thank you. Really exciting part of the session now. So I'm going to invite Hepsi Pemberton to join me for a discussion around the insights and a bit about the research, which of course is a key purpose of today. So a really warm welcome, Hepsi, and delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Matt. I'm so pleased to be here It's very exciting that we have this.
Absolutely. I think we're having a little difficulty sort of hearing you. It might be worth trying to just switch off your camera, then we can hear you really clearly.
Can you hear me okay now, Matt? Am I coming through clearly?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Let's try again.
All right. I'll switch it off if it's a problem. Just tell me.
Yeah, no problem. Excellent. But let's dive sort of straight into this. And I'm just going to start off and say, it's been amazing working and collaborating with you, over the last, what is 8 months, but it's probably a little bit longer actually. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that, the results that we've been able to produce, in the report and all the work that we've done has been really sort of exciting. But I'm wondering whether you could sort of share with the group, what was the genesis of this work and how did we get started?
So we came together, Matt, about 9 months ago, really wanting to build upon the work that has been done around a gender lens in the investment management industry. And we'd seen the great progress that had been made on that aspect of diversity, which actually there was very positive news that came out this week with a 50% increase in female representation on boards for FTSE 350. So fantastic strides made with the gender lens adoption across the investment management industry. But I think we were both aware that there's a long way to go when it comes to LGBT plus inclusion and diversity. And both of us, our respective organizations, work extensively with the asset management industry. And we sensed there's a long way, there's gaps, both in the knowledge and the education, the business case and the adoption of an LGBT plus lens. And we wanted to bring some very tailored, focused research to the industry that we work with that would really speak to their needs and to their understanding of what LGBT plus lens means and looks like. So that was the reason that we launched this research. And we also wanted to ensure that it was global in scope and also intersectional in nature. And what I mean by intersectional is overlapping layers of identity. So thinking about things like LGBT plus with ethnic diversity, racial diversity, different overlapping forms of diversity, because that is extremely important when it comes to understanding inclusion. And really that is the power of the LGBT plus lens, is it's about inclusion. It's about diversity, but it's also about inclusion. Often with a gender lens, it's got stuck just on diversity. It's about number of women on boards, but we need to go deeper than that. We need to actually understand organizational culture, organizational impact. How much do people feel that they belong? How fully are they able to be themselves, their authentic selves at work?
Absolutely, yeah. And one of the things that we sort of learned actually throughout this report is that actually just by focusing on the numbers, how many women, how many LGBT people, whilst it's had some impact, with gender lens sort of investing, what we've really sort of discovered actually it's how do we think broader than this, and actually a real focus around good culture, good inclusion, all of those things that you and I talk about, as diversity professionals regularly around how do we create that equal culture where we have really bold leadership, a great and sort of empowering environment for all of our people with comprehensive action and accountabilities and things. And actually what we started to look at is what are the metrics that we can use to sort of measure these kind of indicators. And perhaps you could share a little bit about sort of the research methodology and how we sort of went about sort of collecting the data.
Yeah, so we were keen to have a very broad base of research, make sure that it was international and intersectional. And we had 3 core data points that we focused on. So first of all, we did an extensive literature review of the existing research and reports that are out there, because there has been great work that has been done on this, and we wanted to build upon that and make it very specific for the investment management industry. We then developed a tailored survey and interview that we conducted with senior investment professionals across 25 global investment and wealth management firms. And that was both across the public and the private side of investment management. And the third data point was a global survey for LGBT plus and allies and the community, which is really the demand side, and understand what their needs and their desires are from the investment management industry. Yes. And so those 3 data points were the basis for our research.
Brilliant, thank you, Hepsi. And just before we sort of share some of the insights with you in a few seconds, one of the things we did want to draw attention to as part of our data collection, we put everybody's name that completed one of the data points, the research with us, into a random hat, and we picked one person out of that to sort of win £1,000 to donate to an LGBT charity of their choice. So the lucky and fortunate winner of this sort of competition, if you like, was Sally Gray, who is an emerging markets, rates and currencies investment manager from Baillie Gifford, asset manager, of course, in Scotland. So we've recently been in touch with Sally to talk about who she'd like to donate the £1,000 to. And Sally has picked Waverley Care, which is Scotland's HIV, hepatitis C and sexual health charity. I wanted to make a few quick points on this. It was essentially a charity that were founded 30 years ago at the height of the AIDS crisis, and today delivers services in every corner of Scotland. They've been doing some fantastic work, obviously, despite the turbulence of the global sort of pandemic. And actually, one of the points from talking to their chief executive, Grant, we were talking a little bit about the impact of the Netflix series, sorry, not Netflix, it's on another sort of channel, I can't remember which one, but around education. It's a sin, education on sort of the age agenda. And actually, since this went out, thank you, Kirsty, for highlighting Channel 4, I stand corrected. We've seen a real intensification of people getting HIV tests. So really inspiring. And I think what this really shows is that education and awareness are so critically important for breaking down stigmas and providing people with the confidence, to be themselves and of course to get tested. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Sally for choosing the Waverley Care Trust. That donation has now been made, and we look forward to sort of taking conversations forward with you. One thing I would like to sort of point out is that the charity's lost around £200,000 of income from public donations since the COVID pandemic got started and due to sort of lockdown restrictions. So I would ask, if every single person that registered for this event today donated just £1, we would have another £400 to send them. So we will be sharing a link afterwards, and if you would like to donate, please do so. So let's move on, Hepsi. Let's dive into some of the insights before we get into our speaker panel today. But what were the sort of the key insights that came out of sort of the research phase? If we can move to the next slide, Jack. Thank you.
So there were three key insights that came out of those three core data points. The first was really around the need to rearticulate the business case on LGBT plus inclusion and diversity. We saw from our interviews that 100% of professional investors really believed in social sustainability as driving positive outcomes around investment returns and risk management, but very, very few, only 15% had considered an LGBT plus lens and the benefits of that. Over half of professional investors that we spoke to had adopted a gender lens. So you can see the progress that has been made there, but still a huge way to go when it comes to LGBT plus lens investing. 85% had not even considered it. And in fact, 68% said there was no visible advocacy from leadership around this, which is a serious problem, because if you don't have leadership stating that this is important and it matters, then why would anyone else at the firm necessarily pay attention to it?
Of course, yeah.
There was also a real disconnect, which you can see here quite visibly on the slide, where 70% were unsure whether there is a demand for LGBT plus tailored investment products. That's compared with our global consumer survey that said 90% of LGBT plus retail investors want this. They want tailored products. So there's a supply-demand gap going on at the moment. Absolutely. And also a lack of understanding of the size of the wealth that could be captured. So 4 trillion annual spending and investing power from LGBT plus consumers. And that data is thanks to LGBT Capital, who annually review this. 23 trillion estimated total household wealth. This is a highly wealthy community and growing in wealth as well. So I think rearticulating that business case, absolutely essential, a real opportunity there. Yeah. The second insight, and I'm just going to speed through these, Matt, in the interest of time.
Thank you, yeah.
The second insight was around education. the need for investment managers to really understand the LGBT plus diversity and inclusion agenda. So you could see that 34% of professional investors said there wasn't any training or education at their firm around this topic, which is still a very big gap. And unfortunately, 25% said that it was mandatory at their firm. This might seem good, but it's not. The research out of Harvard by Professors Dobbin and Kalev of over 800 companies shows that mandatory unconscious bias training will lead to resentment and potentially send the diversity and inclusion agenda backwards. It is not the way to go about education. A much better way to do it is to have leadership endorsing it and having it linked to a very clear strategy. So that's really embedded in the organization and also linked to what is the business case? Why should we even get educated on this topic? Why does it matter? What do I need to understand to apply in my investment role? So, a lot of work to be done there around the education on this topic. The third insight was around the lack of quality data and metrics. I'm sure a lot of people on this call can appreciate this, that this is a challenging area to get consistent data on. We are talking about how people feel when it comes to inclusion, how much they feel that they belong in their company, how psychologically safe they feel. There's quite a lot of sort of nuance to capturing this data. At the same time, it definitely can be done. And there are good examples of firms that do capture this data. It is just not broadly or consistently or robustly done at the moment. And this is a problem for investors. They need reliable and rigorous data to make decisions on. So there's a real opportunity to develop the data set and also to be clear on what best practice actually looks like when it comes to data and metrics. So we saw that 80% of investors believe that this would be of value to their clients and that they would like to see it. But 75% still say it's lacking and they haven't seen what best practice really looks like. It's also worth bearing in mind that there are real sensitivities when it comes to this data and legalities that vary across different countries. So having a real specific understanding of the regional legal consequences and sensitivities around this data is also important. So those were the three key insights that came out of the research.
Brilliant. Thanks, Hepsi. And hopefully we've shared some really bold stats. There are lots more, and the 30-page report will be made available to everybody sort of after the session today. Let's quickly just go on to the final slide there, Jack. And Hepsi's going to talk a little bit about sort of the approach to how we see really developing an LGBT lens and how that might play out as we look ahead.
So we came up with 3 core recommendations that are represented here in this Venn diagram. The first thing is about really getting your house in order as an investment manager. And this gap in the education and the knowledge and clear advocacy, clear visible role models, a clear strategy and a plan that you can then link the education to. And this is particularly important in the investment management industry because you can't really ask your portfolio companies, your investee companies, to do this if you're not doing it yourself. So it's very important that the internal LGBT plus inclusion diversity agenda is really driven forward to a greater degree, and we start to see some of the gaps in those stats close.
Yes, yeah. I think a really interesting point, Hepsi, you make about the role models and visibility. I know, of course, when we started out the LGBT program a few years ago, there were, very few visible, clear role models in the industry. And it's been really great to see, actually, we've had over 500 now that have come aboard as part of Project 1000. And it was great to sort of, see the support coming sort of globally as well. And a quick shout out actually to Colette Cumberford, who was a key part of helping us get this off the ground, who's of course our lead role model ambassador. But we've got to definitely keep on, haven't we, Hepsi, with the role modeling and getting people visible and making sure that leadership is clear as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's why it's great to have Marie and Ian from St. James Place and Northern Trust here today as well, which is visible leadership and advocacy for this topic. And we need to see more of that across the industry.
Yes.
Briefly, the other 2 points are around partnership with third parties And this is especially important for sort of data provision and data capture, advice on actually how do you build the right strategy, how do you even deliver the right education. And then the third piece is around that active ownership framework. So the investment framework that firms are developing to build the methodology, to get the right metrics, to develop the tools they need to apply an LGBT+ lens into their investment process. So those three combined, and obviously we've written a lot more in the research report about how you can go about doing that, who you could think about partnering with, and what actually would work to drive this agenda forward.
Yeah, I think one thing that was important, wasn't it, Betsy, was about how we create sort of practical things that organisations within the industry can really sort of think about. So thank you very much for sharing those insights. HEPSI's contact details and information will be included in the report as well, along with our other partners. So if you've got any queries or you'd like to sort of discuss any of the themes which HEPSI's raised today, please do sort of get in touch. So we've got a couple of questions that are coming through before we get on to sort of the speaker panel. So we have a point that's coming around how do we collect sort of diversity data, especially around sort of sexuality and sort of gender identity. Essentially, we are working on a project on this at the moment, and part of a bigger sort of piece of work that we're doing with the fantastic initiative, the Diversity Project, and the Diversity Project Northern America, with NICSA, the US trade body. And actually also working with this on EY as well. So we will be bringing you some sort of insights sort of on that. But critically, one thing that I will leave you with before I hand over to Kat to facilitate today's panel is actually it's really important that we connect the request for the numbers with the why this is important. And actually, in a lot of organisations and where a lot of businesses are sort of slightly going wrong is that it's just another request from the email request, which people don't necessarily buy into. So a lot around education, building that empathy, visibility, role modelship from leadership, etc. So we have a fantastic sort of panel now, and I'm going to switch my microphone off, video off in a second, to hand over to Katrina, who is the Editor-in-Chief of Investment Week at Incisive Media. We've got the brilliant Marie from Northern Trust Asset Management. And we've also got Ian Rayner from SJP, both of who were featured on our Global Top 100 Executive Allies last year. Thank you for your sponsorship and all that you do for the community. And Kat, over to you.
Great, thanks very much for that, Matt. And yeah, it's been really interesting listening to again about the findings from this report. And I suppose from my point of view, from the media, thinking about how we can start shining a much greater lens on LGBT+ lens investing, and hopefully build this up in the same way that gender lens investing has been built up. Yeah, so I'm joined now by Marie Zanis, Head of EMEA at Northern Trust Asset Management, and Ian Rayner, Chief Operating Officer for St James's Place Wealth Management, to give their views on the report and to also talk to them a little bit more about how they've been championing the LGBT+ agenda at their own firms, which I'm sure we'll find really interesting. So Marie, maybe just starting with you, what were the big reasons why you decided to sort of sponsor this research, and why do you think it's so significant?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'm very proud to participate in this, and thank you for having not only us here, but to have a kickoff conversation like this on something that's quite important. I think this research demonstrates the importance of LGBT+ inclusion and the potential considerations that it could have on investing overall. And as a firm, Northern Trust Asset Management has been a leader in things like sustainable investing and ESG for over 30 years. We manage over 126 billion in that space. And most investors recognize the E and the G. They know about the environment, they know about the governance, but the S gets to shine here. It's about human capital. And so S is traditionally thought about things in the investing landscape as workplace safety, labor relations, workplace benefits, but this shines a light on the portion that is diversity and human rights. And if we think about that, if you get that right as a company, that's a win. And when we see time over time companies that are well run and have well structured programs to get the best results out of their team and get equal contribution and diverse thought, we see this over and over again. personally for me, I'm a big legacy person. I want to see people grow up in my organization and go on and do things far better than I ever can. And the way they do that is they have a voice and they have a contribution. And I always want to be part of positive change. And I think there are important steps that we are taking here today together.
Apologies, there's quite a lot of action going on here at the back. This is working from home. Yes, I was going to ask you, I know we talked yesterday and I was chatting to you about how the importance of the S in ESG, and we've really seen that come through, especially over the last year from the fallout of COVID-19 and the pandemic there, that's really changed that part of the conversation. I presume this is something now that you're really pushing to your teams and companies you're speaking to about the S in ESG, and as you said, about how we can incorporate LGBT considerations within that.
Yes, and if I liken this to years ago, it's a journey, right, Katrina? It is taking steps, taking action, and we start with a dialogue and research and perspective, and the more we can quantify that, the more we can learn from that. But years ago, as I said, being part of that ESG journey 30 years ago, what was available for data was very different, right? And as we talk about it more and prioritize it as something important, you get more access to information. But we've got to start somewhere, and we start with the conversation and the research and the data and the willingness for leadership to take initiative around it.
And Ian, just from your point of view, at St James's Place, what's been really significant to you about this report?
Well, and again, like Marie, very pleased to be here, and hello everyone. I think it starts the conversation, doesn't it, really? And again, like Northern Trust, St James's Place is looking after a lot of people's money, 130 billion in our case. And look, we've seen a lot of progress made on some environmental stuff recently, governance stuff, particularly around gender. But this isn't really something that until maybe now has been raised and thought about. So we're probably bringing something out of the back of our mind and making it a kind of active and conscious part of our decision making. So myself, Rob Gardner, who runs the investment management side of our operation, and Vicky Foster, who runs our inclusion and diversity stuff. You know, we've really got a challenge here to take this forward and make it part of the conversation we're having with the companies that we're investing our clients' money in. And of course, as you say, we've got a responsibility firstly to kind of make sure that St James's Place is in the right place in terms of thinking through the LGBT plus agenda and lens.
Yeah, and I think we were talking yesterday, you were saying about some of the progress you think's been made more recently in terms of sort of what staff have been saying to you, and one of the questions earlier was about how comfortable they feel discussing issues of sexuality at work, for example. And I think you were saying that you felt there had been a lot of progress there.
Yeah, I like to think so. I think the stat, my favourite stat, which I mentioned to you yesterday when we were having a chat, Katrina, was in 2018 we had an employee survey. We have an employee survey every year, but in 2018 there was a question about sexual orientation, and 43% of our people filled it out. We then repeated that in 2020, so last year, and 98% filled it out. So that tells me something pretty significant about how comfortable people are feeling in St James's Place, at least, about giving the organisation that kind of data. You know, that I think is a positive step.
Well, we'll come on a little bit later just to talk about some of the initiatives you've been putting in place and the impact you're trying to have with those, which is obviously the important thing. Just to touch on that data side, Marie, what have you seen of some of the challenges around that? I know we were talking yesterday about those data challenges, especially when teams are investing globally, as different restrictions in different countries.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point that we brought up earlier. And we, like Hefsi said, that if you're looking across the globe, there's going to be different countries that allow disclosure of data to different degrees, right? And part of it has to be the urgency by which leadership and companies are willing to engage in a dialogue around it, so we can get started to saying this is important and we see the benefits of it. And I think if we start with a very good example of what we learned from gender diversity and having cognitive diversity around the table, you can see positive quantifiable differences. So for example, we know that boards that have greater than 30% diversity of females on their team outperform their peers, right? If we can get the same level of statistics and information that we can quantify, it will aid and help the plight. And again, the openness and willingness to talk about this, not only inside of your corporation, but in the dialogues of saying these are things that not only we want to capture it, but why this would be important and what are the benefits. There's an educational opportunity for us as an investment community and as a human community too.
Yes, yeah, that definitely, that educational side, that following it through to what the impact could be and the benefits definitely came through in this report as well. I wanted as well to ask you about some of the initiatives you have been putting in place within your own firms and some of the impact you've had there, what's actually been successful, on what people can maybe take away and share from this. Ian, maybe you can sort of talk a bit about what you've been doing, especially with the sort of equality wealth side of the business and how that's been developing.
Yeah, thanks. So Paul Thompson, the kind of head of LGBT Capital, who's obviously a significant player in this as well, originally approached us, and I can't remember, quite a few years ago now, and we ended up having a conversation, Paul and I, about how we could do something in the advice space here. So we started in quite a commercial place actually, and that led to LGBT Capital and St James's Place founding Equality Wealth, and the idea really, the thing that struck me in the conversations I had in the early days with Paul was this idea of somebody walking in to have a very personal conversation about their life and their money and what they hoped to achieve and what they were worried about with an advisor, and starting that which is a personal and difficult conversation for anyone, but starting that conversation in a position where they felt they were either nervous or they were going to be judged in some kind of negative way about their lives and who they were, and that troubled me, and that kind of led to the foundation of something in St James's Place that has proved pretty successful. We've got a good group of people that face into those type of client conversations now. So that's where we started, and then we've kind of gone and done the more traditional things that big companies tend to do, all of which are good, by the way. But Sarah Bates, who's I know is on this call today, who was our chair at the time, kind of connected us with Matt, and we became part of LGBT Great, and we're very proud and pleased to kind of be one of the key businesses that got behind LGBT Great in the early days. And certainly Matt has challenged us and helped us in terms of some of the things that we've done internally. We've got a great LGBT plus group within SJP now, with some really active kind of contributors from within our community that have really kind of championed this. I've tried to kind of sponsor it from a senior level, which I know can be really important. And yeah, that stat I gave you earlier, I think is the real tangible demonstration of progress, I think, within SJP. But we've got a lot of work to do. I mean, let's be clear about that. We do this IBIT thing, and Matt tells me that our results aren't bad in the scheme of things, but I think that if I got that result in a maths test when I was at school, I'd be pretty ashamed of myself. So
yeah, could try a bit harder maybe. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, there is more work to do, and we'll be going on just the end of these questions to ask you both about what needs to happen now and which of those recommendations you really want to take on board. We do have some questions coming through, I think Matt said. I think, Matt, yes. Are you there? Sorry.
I'm there, yeah. I'll put my little video back on.
Yes.
Interesting sort of conversations, sort of questions coming through here. And I think one of the themes, actually, from what I can see, Kat, is how do investment firms begin to think about this when we were investing in emerging markets, within some of those countries that we saw on the heat map, where LGBT equality just isn't what it is here, and actually just getting the both of our speakers' views on that.
Yeah, that's really interesting, really interesting question, isn't it? Marie, do you want to, I think it was Lee tapping into it, we were talking about data earlier, but do you want to sort of maybe respond on that?
Sure. It involves engagement and dialogues directly with companies when you're thinking about emerging markets on the positive impacts you can have by the benefits of things like diversity. So you have to have lots of conversations and make it part of the important agenda that you are driving with, the industry. Very similarly here, again, as I said earlier, it's the educational piece of connecting the business benefits of why this makes sense. This is about not only something from a human rights standpoint and getting the very best out of talent, but there is an opportunity for us to work at a next level as businesses and corporations by embracing that level of diversity. And let's look at that and examine that and what benefits it can bring. And so if we engage with more industry conversations, perhaps at industry dialogues, next time Ian and I are up on a panel talking about investments, say, maybe there is an opportunity to bring in a different lens, right, which hasn't been discussed as openly, only because we haven't had the data and research available like we're starting today.
Yeah, so I'd say that. I mean, obviously integration is the big word at the moment, but you're right. We tend to look at these things sometimes in sort of separate silos when it should be part of a conversation about emerging markets, as you say.
So a couple of other questions, Kat, just coming through, and one of them is around how has COVID changed the conversation? I think it's a big point, isn't it, in terms of really thinking about sustainability, etc. So perhaps that could be a question that we could put to the two speakers. I'm just looking what else has sort of come through here.
Maybe Ian, do you want to maybe take that one up?
Well, COVID's changed all of our lives, massively. Just the sheer fact that we're doing this via Zoom as opposed to sitting in a kind of conference centre, which I'm sure we would have been doing 12 months ago. I think is testament. Has it changed the conversation? I think it probably accelerates the ability for something like this to kind of become a public thing. Certainly, look, our challenge, I think, in St James's Place is to go out and have this conversation now with the investment managers that we work with, and ultimately, as Marie said, investment managers invest in companies, so we need to kind of start having this conversation with companies, and technology helps us to do that, and technology adoption has obviously skyrocketed as a result of COVID. So certainly in our business, we can now pick up a conversation with somebody in Asia or North America, pretty instantly now, as opposed to potentially a year ago we would have been on a plane and scheduled a meeting and picked it up. So I think it probably has an accelerative effect as much as anything else.
Yeah, Marie.
Add in something there too, from a perspective of just what Ian said on accelerating. I think it also accelerated the appreciation for the value of S in the ES and G aspect of it. First of all, from an environmental standpoint, there was very clear evidence on the trade-offs that when you have less cars on the road, there's less pollution. So, okay, that's intuitive. From the governance standpoint, we have to have operational resiliency and strong things in place during times of market volatility, and that's important, and people get that. But what we saw during times of COVID was our demand and dependence of diversity at the leadership table so that we can better serve our employees and better serve our clients. That was a theme that I think was profoundly resonated with people in a way they hadn't done before. And so if we can take that momentum and better understanding and use that to drive further dialogue on those benefits, I think that's a good launching point for us. And when people are, we've heard some interesting, I wish I had some statistics on this, but interesting conjecture around people who are more introverted or more reserved. I feel like it's more of a level playing field being on a technological platform. Maybe this is an opportunity to encourage people to have a greater voice. So there's all different ways that we can think about it. And since technology has been accelerated, let's see what we can go from here.
I don't know if there's any sort of final questions, Matt, that you think is worth sort of posing before we...
This is one that I thought was interesting. Any sort of advice that we've got actually for how smaller organisations get the conversation started?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to take that. Marie, did you want to take that one? Or?
Yeah. First of all, I want to reflect that being a founding member of LGBT Great has been, we got a lot of encouragement and a commitment and enthusiasm, around the membership and other member firms, right? And, leveraging that to get started, I think is a good way. So if we join in on an initiative, that you can feel part of the dialogue and contribute, I think you'll find a welcoming perspective that you don't have to have everything perfect. Remember, this is a journey. We all have work to do on this journey. And then thinking about, we used a Project 1000 campaign to amplify voices of allies, which means people who really wanted within the organization to express support in the right way. That could be a good place to get started. And then, just looking at your senior leadership in your organization, and do you have business resource councils and the like that you can start with educational programs and not have to create your own, but tap into resources that are already available, might be a good way to get started.
Yeah,
Ian, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I think the small business thing's really interesting, isn't it? Because my extent, and St James's Place, as people might know, is in many ways a federation of 2,500 smaller partner businesses, as we call them. My sense is it can be a bit of a lottery with the people that I talk to as to how much the principles of small firms will engage and are supportive of the LGBT plus agenda or not. And there really are some good stories out there, and really are some quite scary stories. I think the answer, is for bigger organizations, and St James's Place, again, let's make it personal. We work with a lot of smaller companies, and again, without, in a friendly and supportive way, but we need to start having conversations with smaller companies that we work with and say, look, this is important to us, it's important to our clients, it's important to our people, it's important to our partners, and therefore, it's important that you understand this and you take this forward in your firm. And look, if bigger firms do that, if Northern Trust does that, and if SJP does that, and others do that, then we begin to make a bit of progress with smaller firms as well, don't we?
Yeah, I think when we've written about companies in terms of what they're doing in this area, it does seem to be that to have that champion is really important, and that doesn't really make much difference what size your firm is. It's to have someone visible, and that could be hopefully someone in a leader position as well, but it could be someone within the company that really is passionate about this and is keen to come to these sort of events, to get involved, and also to push it at their own firm. So that seems to have made a difference from our point of view. I think I'm conscious of the time, Matt, so I don't know if you have any more time, or if you need to do your closing. So
sure. Well, everyone who knows me, I like to be on time every time, so thanks for handing back over. But I think what an amazing sort of discussion. I think really great to hear from Marie and Ian there on all of those different themes, and I'm sure you'd agree with me that we could probably talk about this for about 3 weeks. So it's been great to get your thoughts and your learning, as well as senior leaders within the industry. I want to say a real special thank you as well to you, Kat, for all of the work that you've done to magnify this work and bring this together. So thank you very much. Shout out to my team as well, who have been brilliant. So Nahid and Jack, I know behind the scenes, you've been helping me get a lot of this done, and to the broader team at Incisive Media as well. And a shout out to sort of Vicky, and I think we're going to say a big thank you to Alexis Marie for helping project manage this across Northern Trust Asset Management as well. So we got there, it's fantastic. So everyone's really pulled together, which is really brilliant. And there's a couple of final points. We will be sending a link round after the session with a link where you can download the report. And please do, connect with us on LinkedIn, with Marie and Ian as well. If you would like to talk about it further, then you know where we are. But I think massive thank you to everybody for joining, and a very happy LGBT History Month. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.